Okay, people. So today I am delighted to be joined by Caroline Sharp, who is the director and producer of Sisters Interrupted. Caroline, thank you so much for your time. How
Thank
are
you.
you?
Very well, thank you. Delighted to be here and to meet you.
Hey, your film, you were at Rain Dance. How was that?
You know, it was quite shocking. We're still getting over it right now, just because this is a film that took us so long, and we were finishing it during COVID or when we could, and then it came out, and there was all these issues, and there were strikes, and all these things were happening that meant
Mm,
it took it a while to find its place, which I think is something that is not uncommon in the industry, particularly when you go the route we did, which is instead of going with a concept to pitch the concept and have a producer attached who helps bring that to life, or a broadcaster, right? We made the film and then tried to ship the film. And so it's a slightly different route to market. So in that time, I went on to do something else, and Chelsea's doing her own thing, and Sophie, our producer, is still working in film, but she's attached to other projects, and we were still really pushing it. But I think for it suddenly to come and have this life quite far after when we made it, in general terms, was it gave us a level of detachment that allowed us to watch it from this place of just, it was surreal and wonderful, and just seeing it in a I think that's a real privilege for any director, right? To see your film in an audience and to watch people on a
mm.
big screen, and to see people respond and laugh in the minutes and that you wanted them to laugh and cry at times and just have an emotional reaction. It is why you do it, not to sound trite, but it's just a wonderful feeling. It really is.
Yeah, I think telling stories is so enriching, right? And it's just that experience of sharing those things with people, and then as you said, having them get it, having them be like, "Oh, that was fun," and you'd be like, "Yes, that was fun." I wasn't sure if people would get that, or
Yeah.
oh, they're getting those, those intimate moments, and it's hitting people in the way you envisioned, but you envision it, but you don't know if it will translate. So when you can see that, it must be so fulfilling.
It's so fulfilling, and it gives me so much more respect for people also who approach these things from this like very purely creative space, because I've spoken to friends of mine who are artists, right? And I think whenever you're doing something creative, in the kind of traditional sense, everything is creative in some way, but in
Mm.
the sense of the creative industries, and you're taking something and putting all of this personal force into it, right? And you're trying to tell your story and something you think is important, whatever medium you choose. There's always these moments when you just think, am I going completely insane? Is anyone going to care about this? Am I being a narcissistic nut job thinking that this is something worth bringing into the public domain? And obviously for us, one of the guiding forces was that even on the worst days, where I just been in the edit room for like hours, 48 hours at a time, and sleeping basically on my editor's floor, just being like, I'm not leaving till we get this scene right, or whatever it was. And you just think, what am I doing? There was a purpose behind all of it for us. So it made me really reflect and think, if I felt that much insecurity at times around this message in the film and the creative endeavor, I can't even imagine the stress for people who are making these like beautiful fiction films or short films or things where the purpose is really the medium and the creativity. That's a whole other level of passion and drive that I just admire so much.
Yeah, one of my great friends is a sculpturist. Um, and she makes these incredible sculptures, but it's just like, I've spoken to her about the process, and it's just like, it can take ages, but you don't know if people are going to gravitate to that piece, and you just make it with this pure intention of creating something wonderful.
Yeah.
And then it's just seeing what happens with it. And it's been incredible seeing her career, the way that it's evolved and blossomed, and like the way that her community has just, you know, gravitated to
Yeah.
her and everything that she does. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, the existential growth from these type of things can be kind of phenomenal one way or the other. But I think that is one of the amazing things about it too, is that it really does bring you in, and you create this community around what you're doing of people who appreciate it or relate to it. And that in itself, you know, was something the whole way through the journey that was pretty amazing for us, was seeing the number of people around the world really who could use social media to clue into what we were doing, because we were posting about it and trying to do some activism around it even during the making of the thing. And obviously Chelsea has always been an activist around this, and one of the few people who's so outspoken about her own journey with epilepsy. And that's been kind of amazing to witness that, you know, despite the fact that social media exists with the purpose to connect us all, although it can be very divisive and do the opposite at times, we were finding that, you know, in this age of interconnectedness, there were still so many people around the world who felt like there was no platform or no community or no way of connecting around this particular issue for them. And that was an amazing experience and a real privilege, actually.
I think it's very important that you just said that, right? Because I think especially now, right, everyone wants to talk about social media as if it's the demon, right? It's this oppressive thing, and but it's just like, it's the way people use it, which is always the issue, right? There's things that are tools, like a knife. We use it for in the kitchen to make things, but people can then use it to stab someone, right? But you wouldn't say a knife is evil, you know what I mean? And so social media is not an evil thing. It's just people use it in this very toxic way. And you know, I think I've seen like these lawsuits against the you know, Meta and the other people, Twitter or X, and just all of this. And it's just like, it feels like instead of fixing the inherent issue, people want to pass the buck to them. Because I think we have this disconnect in the way we communicate as a society. And I feel if these things are taught at an early age, we'd be better, you know?
I mean, I think there's so much in what you just said. And I think that it kind of comes down for me in the middle of things, right? Which is that, you know, we're not at the early days of the internet now. We're in an age where we know how people use them, and we've got to take a pragmatic approach. And it's interesting because you could have a very interesting form of this debate around drug prohibition. But sticking to social media for a second, you know, I think there's no doubt that people like Meta have some responsibility for the way that they've constructed these products, with the idea that there's an inherently addictive quality in mind and very little regulation. They sort of grow into nationless states, right, where they have to take some accountability for what's going on, and they want to wave their hands and say it's got nothing to do with us. And, you know, the bottom line is, at a certain point, there has to be a level of accountability, and there has to also be a pragmatism in the face of, you know, the fact that people will hide behind anonymity to be desperately cruel.
Yes.
At the same time, you know, despite some of the more reductive qualities of, you know, being allowed to use only a certain number of characters and changing our attention span and that type of thing, I think, as you said, there's also an inherent beauty to be found in the fact that you can find your tribe and you can find your people, and you can find, you know, I remember, I'm old enough to remember the early days of the internet when it was just a load of weirdos like sending around, you know, salad fingers memes and stuff like that, and finding other weirdos who were into the same like weird type of comic books as you were into and whatever. You know, that is a beautiful side of it, and I think shouldn't be forgotten. You know, there are a lot of people around the world who feel very disconnected, and obviously they're the same people for whom it can be just as joyous, or they can find a dark side of the internet and find their tribe there. So, you know, there has to be some accountability, but for us it was definitely a beautiful thing to see people hearing what we were saying and finding some strength in themselves to connect about something that is highly stigmatized, right? And that's one of the main themes of this film, and one of the things that shocked me the most is, you know, we're talking about 50 million people worldwide here with epilepsy, a form of epilepsy. And, you know, for people who are listening who don't know a lot about epilepsy, it's the umbrella name given to a kind of symptom cluster, right? But it's a lot of different conditions that fall within that. So anything where you have multiple seizures of some kind, recurring seizures, classes as epilepsy. That could be from a traumatic brain injury as much as you could be born with it. And within that, there's varying degrees and varying pathologies around it. So it's very hard to treat, and it's very hard to pin down. And for those people, despite the enormous number of people suffering from this, it is still so stigmatized. And I think partly because the physical manifestation of a seizure, when you have a grand mal seizure at least, is a frightening thing to see if you've never seen it before, for everyone, right? And so people have felt like this is something they must hide from other people. And I think that's desperately corrosive when you ask people to hide parts of their authentic selves in any way, shape, or form. People should be allowed to live in whatever version they want to, share or don't share, but being able to find others who can relate to your particular type of pain or suffering or life experience, whatever that is, and finding solace in that and strength from that, I think is, to the point we were saying, a beautiful side of the internet. It's a beautiful part of film. And it was something that, I don't have epilepsy myself. I studied neuroscience, but that was the coming together, Chelsea and I, and the privilege that she afforded me was opening the door to this world of experiences and accounts of something which I had a very little personal touch point on before.
Yeah, I thought that was that really interesting moment when I think Chelsea's in her kitchen and she's talking and saying that, it's a worry, right? It's just like she wanted to have kids, and it's like, would she pass that on? How do you connect with people if then they find that one day you have a seizure, right? How do they then look at you? And it's that aspect of it, which, because I think with that, I'm just thinking, like, I don't get it, right? That doesn't really compute to me, because I'm just like, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, if we were just sitting, I mean, we're talking now, but if we were in a coffee shop talking and you then had a seizure, I'm not going to be like, oh God, I can't really hang with Caroline anymore. Oh, what if this happens again? You know what I mean? That thought is baffling to me, because that's not who you are, right? That's something that happens, and it's just, we'll have a conversation, right? Because I'm just like, all right, how can we mitigate this, right? Is there certain situations that bring this on? Could we do things where you're not at a risk of this? Or what's the best thing for me to do? Like, what do you need when you come out? We'll have that conversation, but I'm not going to stop hanging with you. That's insane. But it's just like, I know there are people who do think that, but it's such a weird thing, and you forget that's something that people definitely sit with. And it's just like, I've had people say to me in the past, right, when you're dating and all this kind of thing, be like, I mean, what if our kids have albinism? Like, what if our kids are blind? What if, I don't know if I could deal with that. And it's just like, I mean, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
it's this crazy thing. It's like, why? You know what I mean? Like, it's so weird. But it's these things that I don't think people necessarily think about, right? You look at these issues, right? It's like epilepsy. But you don't think about, okay, what comes with that? How does this affect people just on a day-to-day basis? And I think also it's just like, as you said, it's an umbrella term, which is an issue, because you'll see it depicted in a film or a TV show. And then you think, oh, well, that's it for everyone. But that's not it for everyone, So there's just, yeah, I just threw so much at you just there. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's clearly something that you connect to on a personal level in some way. And I think, for me, that's a joyous thing, just because the aim of this film was really, how can we tell such a specific and particular story in a way that has universal themes that people can relate to, because you may not have epilepsy, but you may have something else that you're suffering from, or that brings you a feeling of stigma or shame, or someone in your family, or something going on. And we felt like these were themes that transcended two sisters who have epilepsy, right? And I think there was a few points you made, but one of them is, of course, firstly, yes, it is a shame that for the majority of people, when they have not had a touch point or exposure to something or a group of people, they find it hard to empathize. So number one, that is a shame. And I think for a lot of people with epilepsy, a lot of the stigma comes from not just the fear that they could die at any minute, right? Because if you have a seizure and fall on a train tracks, or you
Mm,
die in your sleep, or, it's just, you have no control over that. And, I don't know if the end of the film, one of the dedications was to a girl called Isla Schechter, who was a dear friend of ours. And she had a brain tumor and she died in her sleep. And she, at the end, I remember having calls from her sobbing because she was having to go to school with a pillow in her arms in case she had a seizure, and people didn't know what to do, but at least they could put a pillow under her head. That was
yeah.
the reality of what she was living with. And I think we all like to think that if we saw something like that, we would run towards the problem and try and be helpful in some way. But again, the reality is there is a view you can take on the world, which is a should, could, would, a moralistic approach. And we're all trying to strive for that utopian ideal in some sense. But then there's the pragmatism of what we actually have. And in some ways, we just have to work with the fact that there are people who haven't been exposed to these things, and they would be, is that person a drug addict, or is that person harmful or scary to me, or what's going on, that they're scared watching it, right? And
Mm.
again, I would never demonize drug addicts myself, but my point is that there's a real world reaction to things like that doesn't always follow what you hope would be the case. And I think my understanding from a lot of the testimonials we collected over the course of the documentary was that there was this sort of horror in coming around for people, and suddenly it's your first day at school, or you're at your job, and you've had a seizure and you've wet yourself, and you come around and people are looking at you with this mixture of kind of disgust and horror, and they don't know what to do. And it's incredibly isolating and humiliating for those people. And I think, for us, part of tackling that, part of tackling how to make the world a better place for people with epilepsy was in, okay, how do we educate people around it so that they know, okay, everyone go away. This person's having a seizure. One person stay with her. Let's call an ambulance, put a pillow under her head. The whole spoon in the mouth thing is, not true. Don't try and shove anything in someone's mouth
Mm.
and swallow their tongue. It's like, it's just education around the things that people might not know, and you can't expect them to know until they've had exposure. And what better way to give people a safe space to react and acknowledge and understand than through the medium of film, right? You can sit in your sofa at home and watch something and get a chance to see behind the curtain of someone's life, to the human side of what they're dealing with, the horror, the guts, the glory, all of it. And then next time, hopefully, if you're ever faced with that in the real world, you'll have that as a sort of foundation for your understanding that you can call on.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. It's why these kind of stories are so important, because they really open the door on these topics in a way which you don't get in other things, right? I think I just remember Garden State, like at the beginning when Zach Braff's character meets Natalie Portman's character, and like she's wearing the helmet, and he's just like, oh, what? And so you get that whole well, as they get to know each other more, you get the proper explanation of why. But that was kind of it. And you just think, in the context of the film, yeah, you probably didn't need more discussion on it or anything else. But it's just, you see these glimpses of things, but then there's nothing else, right? It's just like, how do I find out more about this? That was intriguing. What? So it's like something like this, it really breaks down those barriers for people and humanizes it. Like, we get to see Tasmin, and when she's not suffering, you get to see who she is, like the humor. I think there's a bit when Chelsea's like, what's the funniest thing that you've seen lately? And she's just like, oh, Will's Willy and naked body. And I'm just like, that's so fucking harsh. You know what I mean? That's so funny. And it's so hard. He's in the room, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's hilarious. And you see that, right? So you see that she's this person, right? You see that she's funny and just all of these things. She's not just someone who is epileptic. She's a person. And I think That's the big thing. It's like, people are people. They just have, you just, sometimes there's these different things that affect someone,
Totally. And it's interesting you bring that part of the film up, because we were making it and it would have been really easy to make it one long sort of sub story, because it's all pretty tragic in some ways. There's
Mm.
humor, but you could take a tact where you're just, barraged with grief and sadness and decline. And the fact was, we didn't want to make a film like that because that's not true to reality either. Tamsin is so funny. And there were a lot of funny moments in the making of this film. Chelsea has the most ridiculous sense of humor. We spent most of the film actually laughing, crying with laughter. But that part was something I really fought for. And I remember we took it to some, of the key people who were reviewing it with us at the time and mentoring us in some way. And, I remember there was some talk around, this doesn't feel quite right, and it's a little bit and I remember us fighting for it, because we were like, this is who she is, and also she's a 35-year-old woman.
Mm.
And that's the reality. She is a 35-year-old woman, and as much as she might appear childlike in some senses, or naive, and she's clearly been very disabled by her condition and the degenerative decline, she's also grown up in some way. She is an adult. And so it's, again, it felt also very British humor. It was just
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
silly and funny. And, it was important to us that people were able to see the variation of her human experience. It is not one note. And certainly from her perspective, it's not one note. And, speaking to the character progression through the film, one of the things I really wanted to achieve with this was the sense of how these sisters interrelated as characters and the roles that they played. And what's so interesting is, whilst Chelsea is someone who appears very strong and courageous and forthright as a character, my intention was to show actually that underneath all of that is a deeply vulnerable person who's very scared and concerned about a lot of things and about the trajectory of her life and her sister. And there's a vulnerability under that. Whereas, interestingly, for Tamsin, it was quite the opposite, which is she might appear as a very vulnerable character in a lot of ways, but she actually has this core of strength that is so unexpected once you dig beneath the surface. And, there were these moments of lucidity from her where she's talking about, the fires that were going on in California at the time, having these suffering. And we thought, where is this coming from?
But that was so, I think, important to show, right? Because it was just like, oh, what do you want to be when you go, if you could be anything? She's like a princess and a waitress, right? But she loves Rachel from Friends. And she's like, I want to get married in California. And Chelsea's like, oh, you like her? And she's like, California, I think it's beautiful, but not now because there's all the fires. And you're just like, okay, if someone has got an infantile mentality, if someone is disconnected, how are they knowing about fires? How are they knowing and she's like, oh yeah, it must be so hard for people, and talking about the impact on people. So you just see, no, it's clear there's a cognitive understanding of what's going on in the world, right? So I think you can't discount Tasmin as a person and everything that's going on, where I think it would be easy to try and do that because of the autism and the epilepsy.
Totally.
I think
it's a tale as old as time, right? The whole never judge a book by its cover thing. But even to the point that we were speaking about before we began around chronic pain, it's a sort of iceberg type condition, if you will, right? Where 90% of the condition is hidden under the surface and goes on day to day, and is the psychological impact. And I'm talking about epilepsy, but I'm sure the same is true of many conditions where there's so much suffering that goes on in a very hidden way, right? And I think the never judge a book by its cover thing transcends across all of these different themes, because there's not only the complexities within Tamsin, and by the way, day to day she would be more lucid or less depending on and depending on how many seizures she'd had the day before or what the state of her health was. And this is a shifting spectrum of understanding for her. And sometimes she was much more high functioning, and some days we'd come in and it would be heartbreaking because she was just so under it from medicines or from seizures. And, that's the reality of the condition. And I think that's the reality of many conditions, even when the majority of the symptoms are hidden, is you're fighting so many battles. You're fighting, if it's chronic pain, you're fighting the pain, you're fighting the side effects of the medicines, you're fighting the social shame and stigma of something that, you're trying to explain to people. And, it's hard. It's really hard. How do you get that across? I don't know.
It's a difficult thing, because even when you have a conversation with people, like it's like a goldfish, you know what I mean? They seem to forget about it.
Mm.
Right? It's just, yeah, I've just been dealing with this chronic like pain for the last, I don't know, like 10, so well, longer, because at the beginning it wasn't, it was more intermittent. And so it's just like, you just think, oh, I think I pulled something, or I don't know, maybe I trained too hard or something. And then it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And so it's just trying so many different drugs. Right. And the problem is you try you go to the hospital, get your appointment, they give you some drugs. So you try them, have horrendous side effects. Then you're like, so then you have to wait for the next appointment. You go back and be like, okay, that didn't work. Can we try something else? You get something else. And it's rinse and repeat until you find something that works. But even if something works, it's not 100%. Right, the effect it has on you, it makes you feel like you're walking in quicksand, right?
Mm.
That you're in slow motion and everything else is speeding past you. Like the way you think is just slowed and diminished, and it's just horrible. Like
Mm.
it's a horrible feeling that you have. And then there's like, marijuana, right? The medical marijuana, and you do your own research, because you speak to doctors and they'll tell you one aspect of things, but they won't touch on certain stuff. So you do research and you find out that might help, but then you find you can't get it, right? You can't get it. And I think the interesting thing with this, and I wondered what your take was, because it's talking about, I think a lot of the talk was about the medical side of things and the legislation on that point. But I think it's clear that it's not legalized properly in this country because of oh God, man, lobbying from pharmaceutical companies, from tobacco, and like those are the ones. Like, it was like the printing press that demonized hemp back in the
Mm.
day, because hemp was a better material to write on and to make things with. So there's all of these things that seem to be that big thing, right? Because do you remember when the law was passed to take alcohol and cigarette advertising off TV and sports?
Yeah.
And then it was just like, actually, we'll still let it in Formula One. And it's just like, wait. You were saying it's harmful, it's damaging, it will lead to all, but now you'll let it in Formula. Why was that? Really? Oh, did they give you a big check?
Mm.
Right? Is that the thing? And I think that's an issue. That's a huge issue.
Yeah. I can't speak to the degree to which lobbying may or may not have had an impact on how much doctors prescribe, just because it's not something that I really have the data on, although it sounds like a very convincing argument from you, and perhaps you do. But I wouldn't discount it. I just wouldn't be able to speak credibly on it. But what I could say is that, even recently I spoke to a friend of mine who's a neurologist, and his view was it doesn't work, right?
Mhm.
His view is it doesn't work. And I think that what I'm witnessing is, I don't demonize doctors. I think doctors have a hard time, right? They are trying to treat conditions where they rely a lot, often for these conditions, on a subjective reporting, right? So they
Yeah.
can take scans, they can do that, but ultimately there's a whole subjective world going on, a whole lived experience that they're trying to contend with. How do these drugs make you feel? Do they work? And obviously you can see if something's reducing seizures, but at the same time, someone's quality of life is just untenable. And they're trying to get from a place of, I have no personal experience with how this feels and I can't imagine it, but I'm going to try and help you to get to an endpoint. And I think, I have a lot of sympathy for that. However, again, this comes back to this question of moralistic versus pragmatic. And I think in the case of this, what is difficult for the situation, or at least a challenge, I should say, not difficult, is that this is a patient-led revolution in the sense that there's a lot of real-world evidence, what we call real-world evidence, versus, say, clinical studies that can support that from a clinical perspective, which is what doctors, NICE, the governing body of the NHS, that type of thing, look to in order to sanction, okay, this is worth the cost and this is what we're going to do with it. And that they do cite a lack of evidence, right? Which, I think a lot of people would contest, given that it is medically accessible in many parts of the world and the private healthcare system. But this is obviously the pros and cons of having a national healthcare system, right? There's a lot of different factors that come into play. And so it's very tricky. And the problem for us, and we were at a conference last week where we showed the film, and it was, all about medical cannabis, the conference. And I think that the real shame about all of this is that this burden falls on the patients. And the burden falls on patients, and you have a lot of patients who get there and say, well, just grow your own. And the issue with that is that if you can, and that works for you, and you're an adult who has a garden or wants to treat yourself, and you're able to do that, and say it's something like chronic pain where you can dip in and choose and try different strains, and you can kind of manage that to a degree yourself. You're already living with the pain, right? It's not necessarily a daily life or death situation. It's just a quality of life is so inferior that you're trying to alleviate something that is exhausting you and taking away your ability to live to your fullest. The problem with something like epilepsy, especially where, intractable, untreatable epilepsy is involved in children, right, is that that's just not realistic. Okay. If you're a mother and you have a child who is 5 and seizing consistently, and you're constantly worried they're going to die, and you want them to try medical cannabis, what you don't want to be told is grow your own. Okay. That is a lot of effort. What you want to be told, and also, by the way, there's no quality control.
No.
You don't want that. You want something that is medicinal. What do I mean by medicinal? I mean, when I go to the pharmacy and I pick up Nurofen, every single Nurofen is the same. I know the dose I'm getting. I know what's in it. It's been validated for me. I can feel safe buying that from that brand, knowing this ibuprofen is 200 milligrams or whatever, and I'll take 2 and my headache will go away. But, I can be sure of that. When it comes to kids with epilepsy, right, you can't ask a parent to do that. And unfortunately, parents are being forced into a black market, right? They're being forced to take those risks and do the things that they have to do, because what wouldn't you do for your child if you are watching that happen? Okay. And so there is no demonization from me there either, because this is desperate. These are desperate parents who would do anything for their kids, and they are the true heroes of the story. Undoubtedly, they're the people who led the medical cannabis movement and legalization in the States. They are the people who are leading it here. They're amazing, but they shouldn't have to do that, is the point. And I think that's where it gets very complicated, because, what are the alternatives? You've had under 5 people have been giving a prescription for medical cannabis in the NHS since November 2018. It's outrageous. It's outrageous.
It's insane. And the other thing with medical marijuana as well, like there's no the hallucinogenic elements taken out, right? So you just have more of the CBD.
Well, actually, it's a really good point you raise. So I think one of the difficult things also is, I might be, I was in philosophy, so I always get stuck into the language of things. But in this case, it is a language issue, because we talk about medical cannabis or medical marijuana, or, as if it was a sort of one size fits all, cannabis. And actually what we're really talking about, if I put my science hat on, is we're really talking about specific compounds in a specific combination. And of course, we all dream of the day when we get to the age of personalized medicine, where you can have something that fits your genetic profile perfectly. And I think there are already companies that sort of match type of things like that. But you are right in saying that the only FDA-approved medicine, to my knowledge, still is one from GW Pharmaceuticals, which is, funnily enough, a UK company, although I think they were acquired, who were producing something called cannabidiol for epilepsy, which was a CBD isolate, essentially derived from naturally grown cannabis, right? It wasn't a synthetic drug. And that was being used to treat people with epilepsy successfully and past FDA approval. But there are also different combinations of those compounds depending on what works best for you. And again, then that puts you down to, the type of patient you are, the type of condition that you have, the age.
Yeah.
What you are right in is that for children with epilepsy who are looking for a approved medicine, that medicine is a CBD isolate, which has no psychoactive effects.
Yeah. Because I think that's the problem with trying to say grow your own, because you can't take that out of it. And
Sure.
I think, with someone under a certain age, taking psychoactive stuff, not the best, right? It's not the best. And I think the big thing with all of this, and it's like, oh, well, look at the trials, right? Oh, there's no trials, so we can't prescribe. There's no trials because it was illegal to do trials. Right? When something is a class A or a class whatever, you can't do medical trials. So there's no medical trials because it was always that class of drug, so it's such a cop out when people use that. But when right, I've seen papers talking about how it helped with PTSD, how it helped with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, like, so, it helps with cancer relief. Like, there's so many things they found that it can help with. But yeah, we're in this weird gray area that it seems to be very difficult to navigate.
Yeah, you're completely right, because again, the doctors are not the problem in this story either. There is a whole legacy, and there's a couple brilliant documentaries about this. I think it's 13th and The House I Live In. They really speak incredibly well and in depth to the history of drug prohibition and the laws. How, none of those were scientifically driven. They were all racist endeavors following, prohibition of alcohol that failed in the States, that we over here as, the little brother of America at this point, having gone from being the big brother to very much the little brother, followed suit. And, one of the, I think, ironic things, right, is that we just copied what they did, and now they're much further ahead than we are. And apparently, the huge tax, benefits that can come from selling cannabis legally are not of interest to our post-Brexit dystopic life we're living in. But regardless, I think that we are in this limbo time right now where we're just not turning the ship around fast enough. So there are people over here who know it works for them, and because they're trying it on the black market for themselves in various ways, and they're trying to push the needle, and they have all this real world evidence, right, self-reporting, and it's working for them. They just want to be told, okay, you can be valid in your approach to that and have something in a medicinal quality controlled sense. And then you also have doctors over here saying, I have to work within the constraints of the institutions and the bodies that I work with. And so, they're not asking them to go out on a limb and risk their careers on certain things is also not the viable route. And so that's why this really has to be more than virtue signaling from the government around, okay, we're going to make it legal, but then not actually implement a way for people to access it. And I think that's, unfortunately for the UK, I think there are less conspiratorial forces at play as well. I think we've just also had, this all happened 2018, and then it was Brexit, and then it was this, and then it was COVID. And I think, this just, as an issue that should have gained momentum at the time when it could, it really got sidelined to some of these other global disasters. And so it's something that we're seeing, talk coming back now. And there's a very dedicated, amazing group of patients and parents and people who are trying still to push the needle forward. But, as I said, and speaking to the social media comment at the beginning, for me, this isn't a case of demonizing or creating opposition. This is, how do we speak the right language? How do we find out the right ways to lean into this and provide the things that people need, or work with people to get it to a place? The outcome is still, let's get patients the opportunity to try this medicine in the hands of a doctor so they can feel safe and they can feel heard. And what do we need to do to get there, to work with all the stakeholders involved in that process?
Yeah. I mean, exactly the things that need to be said. I feel like this is a really, it's a crazy complicated, subject,
Yeah.
which then does beg the question, Caroline, why the hell is this your directorial debut? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you'd think you try and pick something simpler. You know what I mean?
Oh, you sound like
To
my
work on.
parents.
You could have thrown your hat and did Paddington 3, but no, you decided to tell this story. Like, why was this the one that you were like, yeah, this is where I'm gonna step behind the camera. This is where I'm gonna take, you know what I mean? Be head honcho in charge.
Yeah. I'm a glutton for punishment, apparently. um, I think it's multi-strand, that question. Ultimately, I had completed a master's in neuroscience, which was actually the culmination of 3 years of doing philosophy and looking at philosophy of mind. And I wanted to understand, like, okay, I've sort of studied the brain from a very subjective perspective. Now I want to go into the real hard truths of the matter. And I had an amazing year at UCL, and then I was doing some work in Alzheimer's, and I before I embarked on a PhD, what I realized is, I think my particular skill set, what I like, is connecting with people and talking about the things I love. And God, I love scientists. They're some of the most creative people in the world, in a lot of senses, right? But they also fall on a particular spectrum of neurological operation that can be very focused and deep on one thing. And I'm more of a lateral thinker, and I really wanted to get into film because I thought, okay, there's an appetite for these type of scientific kind of issues and neurological issues, and a thirst for education around them that wasn't being catered to. So that was where I was trying to find myself around the time that Chelsea and I met. And again, glutton for punishment. I think this film was one of those films where it could have been 10 different films, as with many, right? As with many.
Yeah.
I always say that if I did a documentary again, I'd want to do it Werner Herzog style. He'll be like, this person is going to start this journey at point A, and they will finish at point B, and we will film them all the way through. He knows, some not, but often there's a sort of time period he works within. And I think for us, this was, there's another type of documentary making, which is this thing is unfolding. Let's shoot and see what happens with this film. And I think when we started, again, speaking to the stigma of it, Chelsea and I connected, and I said, I think epilepsy is so interesting, and this is all stigma. And she was like, yeah, but the medical cannabis stuff too. And of course, it was just exploding out into public consciousness in a different way, particularly in the UK. So Chelsea and I really connected over that and started making this film, and got a load of talking heads, but we got a load of footage around cannabis, and we got a load of footage or whatever. And we just got to the edit, and firstly, trying to cram this into a broadcast hour, which was the intention, was absolute chaos. But also, I sat there with my editor, Alistair, and thank God we loved each other so much, because if we didn't, it would have been an absolute disaster. We had to spend hundreds of hours just going through everything and finding the story in the edit, which I wouldn't advise to anyone else who's making a documentary. My little brother is a producer and about to make a feature, and I sat him down and I was like, for God's sake, don't do what I did. Like a warning from the future, because it was really intense trying to pull that out. But when we did, it felt so worthy, and it felt so personal and funny that we came back to just this story of the sisters at the heart, and I think, as I mentioned, those 2 documentaries and countless others have covered many aspects of drug prohibition and legislation in different parts of the world in a very interesting way. And we actually felt, they've said a lot that we could either repeat in a different context, or we could try to tell the story from the unique angle we have. And also the story of epilepsy is one that really just hasn't been platformed enough, and hasn't been spoken about enough. And so that contributes to a lot of the stigma and the shame. And, that was where the purpose really drove through everything. And hitting on that was like hitting on a gold nugget in a haystack. So I don't know if that answers your question. I'm obviously have a streak of the insane in me, but I guess you kind of always have to want to make a indie film on a budget.
Yeah, it's funny. Early in the year, I spoke to a gentleman, Alexander Jeffrey, and he made a documentary called "You Have No Idea," and it was following. Oh, I forget the name of this young man, but he had. Oh gosh, I think it's like autism, and I think he has some form of seizures along with that. And yeah, like yours, it's this intimate kind of look at life and finding those ways to navigate it, and how the community has, really been there to support him and his mum, and just in the family and how everyone's helping. And it was so interesting. And I think you don't always need those, macro level things, right? Looking at all those other moving parts. Sometimes you want that micro look at this one person, right? This moment in time, how people are navigating things. Because, like, looking at the big picture and the legislations and all of this kind of stuff is very important, very vital. But to really connect, sometimes you need things like this that really help you hone in and see what it actually does on a day-to-day basis. How do people live with these situations? And you just, because I think people often think, oh, that must be terrible. Oh, that person has no life. But then you see someone and you be like, oh no, they are happy, right? They are doing nice things. Like, I think, was it the picture of Tamsin in Poland?
Mm.
I've not been to Poland. You know what I mean? Like, you've been to Poland. Like, yo, okay. You know what I mean? So it's just like, she still is living, right? Which then talks to the strength that you mentioned, and that juxtaposition of, Chelsea out there doing all of these things. You think, oh, Chelsea's got all this strength, but then, that moment, and she's just like, sometimes I just want someone to hold me and say, I've got this,
Yeah.
right? Which was just like, God damn it. I mean, that's so universal,
Yeah.
right? That's such a universal thing. You just want someone to, you know, be, hey, don't worry, I've got this. You just relax. I've got you.
Magic words.
You know what I mean? But then you look at Tamsin, and she's, you know persevering through all of this stuff, right? It's not
Yeah.
having her sit in a corner and be like, what's the point? She's still doing stuff, right? Still like, oh, I'm going to get married in 2 years in California. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, she, she still has goals. She still has aspirations. She's still living life.
Yeah.
And I think that this kind of story helps you understand that and see these realities.
I really appreciate that because, again, speaking to the first time filmmaker aspect of this, there's a lot of pressure, and it's also a confidence battle, right? I think there are some people I've met who are filmmakers, and they're like, my word is God, like, and they have that inner confidence, and I'm like, you know what, respect, right? You know exactly how you want this to end up. You got all the confidence to execute it, and some people are just born with that. That did not come innately to me around this experience. And there were a lot of times where, when we were filming, we felt like, and I think, also, by the way, Chelsea was very involved as a producer. At the beginning, we were to make this together, and that was a blessing and a curse in some ways, right? Because I think the curse of it was, there was a level to which she felt exposed through it being her own family, and couldn't see that that was really the beauty in the whole thing. She didn't have
Mm.
that confidence, which I completely understand, because if you were to expose my mental family in a documentary, I'd be having an absolute meltdown, right? And she, there's a lot that's been, stigmatized and shamed, or not to drone on about those words, but she was the living embodiment of that, despite being part of the process of this. And
Yeah.
that was a huge journey in itself for her, and one I have utmost respect for, was getting to that place of reconciling with that being, you know, the core theme of the film. But the other part of it was just the pressure that you have, honestly, industry pressure. You look at, you know, Netflix and all these different streaming platforms, and you're like, okay, are we going to sell, like, do we need to make it a certain way to make it glossy for them? Are they going to care about this? And and actually, you know, maybe not. You know, we didn't have much success when we first went to broadcasters, and in a way, I'm not surprised, because this is in a way an old school doc, right? This is a slow mover. No one turns out to be a Russian spy. No one turns out to, you know, have a case of they killed someone and had a false identity. You know, it's not that film. That is
And
not.
you didn't get Morgan Freeman to narrate it either. So,
You know what? He said he would, but we just thought not the right guy. We said, not Morgan. We don't need you for this. You know, but yeah, we didn't have any of those things. So we have made an old school doc in a lot of senses. You know, this is a Grey Gardens-esque. It's an observational piece. There is some narration in it. It is not entirely set away from the subject. And of course, we got very intimate and involved. So you see that as well. And it's not pure in that sense, but it is slow moving in the way, in opposition to what you would consider fast-paced documentaries now, and the attention spans being taken in, and algorithms and this and that. You know, it was a love letter. And I think part of that also was, we sat down and we were saying, you know, who are we making this for? You know, really, who is this for? Because some films can be for absolutely everyone, but, you know, Marvel films aren't meant for me, right? Like, you know,
yeah.
God help me, I'm sure they're great. And if you get stuck in, I probably could. I can get addicted to anything, but they don't seem to be, I'm not the target demographic in a lot of them, right? Whereas we sat down, and of course you want everyone to watch this film, but the thing that drove us through this was actually, again, those people who would reach out to us and feel like they were not being seen or heard, and had no one to speak to, and didn't know where to go, and hadn't really had that connection. You know, Chelsea always felt like growing up, she never had a place to put those inner fears and worries, because there just wasn't a community that she could reach out to. Or what that she had found. I'm sure they existed, but it wasn't as easy. And that's when we realized, okay, you know what, I'm throwing the stuff out the window. We really want to make this film for people with epilepsy and their families, right? They're the people who, if they sit down and they watch this and they think, I resonate for the first time, I'm seeing something projected up there, you know, of myself or my inner landscape and my fears that I resonate with, that's a huge, huge win. And then, of course, the second tier is, you know, people who have never been exposed to it and then would find it interesting. There are going to be a lot of people who sit down and watch the first 5 minutes and they're like, nah, this is not what I want on my Sunday night. I'm going to turn on Chocolat or like a Marvel film or whatever. This is not cozy watching. And I get it. That's fine. It doesn't have to be for everyone. And so I think that was where we took it from. This has to be this universally applicable thing with and we just thought, you know, let's make the film that we want to make for the people that we know are the ones that are going to really care.
But I feel that is something that people often learn later on. You know what I mean? Because I think you talk to a load of filmmakers, and you know, it's trying to make something that everyone's going to gravitate to. But I feel no one's ever going to gravitate to everything, right? There's not that one thing that just everyone loves. You know, there's things people say they love because they feel they have to say they love it, but you know, deep down they don't love that thing. You know what I mean? So
what is that for you? What is that film for you?
Oh man,
there's gotta be one.
No,
I pretend to like this and I don't.
I don't even pretend, you know. I hate E.T. I don't like E.T. I don't like the Goonies. I don't get it. I don't get it. They irritate the hell out of me. Shut up. You know what I mean?
Do you know what mine is? Mine is a series, but God help me, I'm going to get slaughtered for this. But, you know, I just couldn't get into Breaking Bad. I know everyone loves it. I know everyone's like, oh, it is the best ever. But I'm like, I'm just going to watch Sopranos for the 4th time. This is so hectic for me. I can't cope.
It's funny. I was talking to my friend at the London Film Festival, and we were talking about different films and stuff like that. And I forget how we got onto it, but we got onto Breaking Bad. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I loved it." I haven't finished it yet. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I just didn't finish it. I'm like, what do you mean you haven't finished it? I've watched it 2 times already. I'm just like, I mean, because like this bit, I remember there was an episode and there's a wasp or a bee. I don't know, it's a buzzy thing. And that's the whole episode of him trying to get rid of this thing. And I was just like, I don't know what really this does for the story. This isn't taking the story forward. Why is this there? And everyone's like, it was such a phenomenal episode. This should be nominated for Emmys. And I'm just like, oh,
I was like, this is the dad from Malcolm in the Middle selling drugs. Like, this is destroying my childhood. I think it was just a lot.
but yeah, so I think understanding that something doesn't have to be for everyone
Mm.
is huge, and I feel it gives you more freedom in the creation. Is did you find that when you understood that we're not trying to make this for every single person, that now you can just focus on what the actual story is?
I think it did, although again, there was a lot of inner turmoil at play around trying to please the people I worked with who wanted different things, and it was a lot of chefs in the kitchen.
Mm,
We were all just doing our best. Dang it,
yeah.
we really were. And I think one of the actual fears that I had, and yes, to your question, it was freeing. I think when we just sort of press the fuck it button, as it were. Sorry, you can bleep me out, but basically we were just like, come on, this is this is not working for a reason. It's not working because we're trying to do 5 different films for all these different people. And it's a good life lesson, right? No one's ever you don't need everyone to like you or your film or anything you do. You just need to feel good about it and feel like the purpose is, there, and that will drive you. And so I think the real fear came when I was sitting down at rain dance and I thought, oh God, I'd been completely calmed at that point. I looked around the cinema and I was like, oh my God, I've dragged all my friends here, and like all these people have shown up for me and they've heard about this dang film for like 6 years or whatever, and they're just like, giving money to my bloody Kickstarter, whatever it is. And I just thought, oh my God, this is going to be so embarrassing. I can't cope. And of course, there were moments in it where I looked and I just was like, oh, that shot's really out of place. That really didn't work. And I knew it was shoehorned in for the wrong reasons, right? And oh, that like didn't quite work. But there were also these moments where, like I mentioned with the Tamsin thing, when she's talking about Victor's naked body, or like the other scene that you pointed out was just Chelsea talking about her own fears about having children and looking after Tamsin, which for me as a woman, I remember I had sort of battles about this with other people because they didn't see the relevance. In some ways, it didn't feel like, core, whatever. And to me,
Mm,
it really went very deep to also this feeling as a woman of like, motherhood. And, whether or not I have a lot of friends who don't ever want to have kids. I have friends who desperately want to have kids. I'm one of those people who was born imagining, 10,000 children around me and, being a mother. So I happen to fall that way, and no judgment either way. But regardless, it's this sort of pain of like, how am I going to be a good mother in all senses? There's so much pressure on women in general, don't be a working mother, but also like, don't not work and, don't do this or whatever it is. And I
yeah.
can't even imagine the extra layer of pressure that would go on Chelsea thinking, what do I do if my kid has epilepsy? Can I actually cope? I have epilepsy myself. Her own parents obviously found it incredibly difficult to
Oh
have to.
God, yeah, that conversation, because I was just when she was speaking to the neuroscientist, it was a neuroscientist, wasn't it?
David Nutt, the professor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and he's like, "Oh, we found an enzyme you both have." I was
Mm.
a bit like, "Yeah, obviously." Right? But it was just like such a shock. And when she told her dad, he was just like, "What? Huh?" And it seemed to be such a crazy moment. And you're like, "Yo, damn."
Mm. Yeah.
Right? It was such a
Yeah.
yeah, this huge moment that you captured. And I think, as you said, I think it's something that people like. I think about, you know, if it's not just having kids and going, oh, what if they've got bad eyesight too, right? What if they can't see shit too? But it's kind of like, yo, what limitations will be there? Because you know what I mean? It's going to watch them play. I won't be able to see them play football. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? If I'm sitting back there, I can't see what's going on. It would just be like clapping and be like, he's not on the ball. I'm like, oh, okay.
You're like, go anyone. Go
Like, good goal. He's scored an own goal. I'm like, ah, fuck. Okay.
But
You know,
still, but
yeah,
still.
the things that I'm just like, I'm gonna have to Apple tag them because you know I'd be have to then keep track on my phone and be like, okay, they're here, cool. You know what I mean? But like that's stuff that I think about, like what you know what I mean. So I just think that scene when she's like, you know, bearing her soul on that point, I think it was so like impactful, and I think you don't have to be in that exact situation to get it. You
Yeah,
know?
you really don't. And I think again, this was something we tried to pull out with the film is what wouldn't you do for the people that you love, whether you're a caregiver or a parent or a sister or a sibling that's forced into some sort of caregiving role, or frankly, none of the above. The reality is through our lives, something is going to happen to someone we care about, and we're going to have to deal with that. And it's going to be something that you face in whatever way that you can to the best of your ability, right? And so you know, I've personally never my siblings, thank God, are both healthy and thriving. But regardless, I can even just imagine what wouldn't I do for them? I mean, I would throw myself in front of a bus without hesitation for either one of my brothers, with probably no thanks for it, by the way, but I would do it. I do it.
Why you do something so stupid,
Why are you being
Caroline?
so dramatic? I'm such a martyr. But you know, I would do it. I would do it. And yeah, I think it's just, you know, she's caught in this interesting. I actually have a dear friend who came. He's got two sons, and one with autism, very severe autism, debilitating autism, and one who is leading a very healthy life. And I think he said, you know, as a parent, there was so much I resonated with, just because, you know, it's a very different, it's not very different, it's a different scenario, but it
Yeah.
just isn't about the particulars of the situation. And that really was the film that I could speak to, because again, I think you have a challenge, and we faced this recurring conversation over the different activism movements that we've seen come out in the last few years, and the way that we approach minority conversations and struggles and things like that. We talk about, how do you not speak for someone else's experience, right? How do you let people speak to their own experience and give them space for that and validate their lived experience? You know, you don't have to agree with certain factual components, but if someone is telling you, I feel traumatized by something, or something is hurting me in some way, you listen, and you don't try and project onto them what you think should be the case. And that, I think that's something we're coming to try and acknowledge as a society. And so that was a challenge for me, was also, how can I speak from my place of observation whilst not trying to project something onto the story? And so I think that's where I tried to speak to the things that I could, which were the more universal themes that I could relate to, and then let the two sisters tell their own story otherwise, you know, craft their own narrative and just try and facilitate that through the vessel that I could speak to.
Yeah. No, and you did a tremendous job. You really did. You really did. Like, how has this kind of been for you though? Because now it's done, right? But I don't know, like I feel sometimes you can look into a subject and that subject is now always with you. Is that this film? Like, how is this film and the making of this kind of changed who you are?
Mm. So when they finished the film, I was like, that was the most goddamn traumatizing experience of my life. I'm not ever thinking I'm done with film for now. The whole thing was just like heavy in every way. Plus there was COVID, plus there was this. It was just like a chaotic end to the decade of my 20s. And I was like, this is a lot. And so I sort of thought, okay, I'll depart from doing, I can't leap straight into the next one. I loved the process. And what I loved about it was being in a position where film is incredible, and actually in a lot of ways like science, which I have some touch point with too, in the sense that you have a lot of people who are specialists, right, in particular niche things. Your job is to create a narrative or a direction that pulls everyone's little creative spheres together and allows people to do the best of their ability in their thing, and you stitch it together. You're not telling them what to do, you're sort of allowing them to bring that to the table and pulling it together in some way. And it's such a amazing experience. And I actually went the next couple of years, I had a startup in a very different sector and was looking and doing AI stuff. But interestingly, around the time that this was all happening, I just started a new position in London at an investment firm where I run the life sciences, so the medical division of this investment firm, where we build businesses that sort of sit at the intersection of neuroscience and neurology and AI. So now every day I have a different form of input with the subject. Epilepsy comes up. One of the things I'm working on is an amazing new way of imaging the brain using ultrasound. Another one is a generative like ChatGPT for the brain. I mean, these things are amazing, people doing amazing things, and I have a different touch point on them, but it feels like a continuation of a theme. Is how can I create impact from a place that I have some understanding? What's my little mark on what's my area? And I seem to gravitate back towards this sort of neurosphere of something or other. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. So I mean, it really has shaped it, and watching the film was it was amazing, because from that place of kind of detachment, I could be proud of what we did, which I definitely wasn't at the time, just because you're so deep in it, and it could have been this type of film or that film, and all the different kind of sliding doors options are in front of you. You don't know if you pick the right one and whatever. And then it was just it was great to see that, how that narrative had progressed, and suddenly it all came together in this little moment.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, because I think that's the thing with creating stuff, right? Because communications pays the bills. And I've done a lot of work with the NHS. I worked at a place called World Obesity Federation, and it was working with a lot of researchers and scientists to, talk about, obesity and, the causes of and preventions and treatments and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's creating these things to do this. And I put together like the first World Obesity Day and this image bank around obesity imagery and stuff like that. And you're doing it, and what I mean, obviously you map out this whole thing, the strategy, and then you'd be like, okay, so this will probably take about 6 months, maybe 12, and we'll do it. And then someone's like, got to do it in 2, and you're like, is that what? And so every day you're doing it and you're getting it done, and you're just like, oh, fucking hell, this is terrible. Like, this is so embarrassing. Like, I could do so much better. And then you look and you've like trended over social media for 4 days, and you get the front page in the Guardian, but you're just like, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't how I envisioned it. But when you take that step away, you can go, that was actually good. That we did some good work there. But when you're in the thick of it, it's just like, for fuck's sake. Oh God. I'm not, I feel I'm better than this. But it's just like,
I'm destined for more. Why are you sleeping on my editor's floor right now? I know the feeling.
But what did it feel like when you got picked up by Fremantle?
They've been amazing. They're so supportive, and I think it was that first moment of validation we really needed. Just any sign of life from the outside world that what we'd done was in any way relevant, and the years we put in was in any way, someone wanted to watch it, and that was great. I think this, it's just been, everything has exceeded our expectations, because our expectations were so low coming out of it. We were all just tired. I was tired, beaten up. I was like, I'm over it. Like, I don't even know what this film is. I can't watch it again. And there were so many amazing people in it. Of course, you kind of, you're over it. By the way, you're kind of over it. Like 2 years before you're done. Like you've still
Yeah.
got to do it. Like you're over it, and you have to find the strength somehow inside to be like, no, if I stop now and I don't put it to 100%, it will live forever in a non 100% effort
Mm.
capacity, right? It's not going to be the best film. Like I'm at peace with the fact that there are people with way more like cinematographic chops than I have, or they've been in the game for a long time, or that's, it's like, of course, it's fine. That's fine by me, right? This is a first time film and I did my goddamn best. But what I'm not going to do is have something come out into the world and not be, from my own personal perspective, me having put in 100%. If I can look
Yeah.
back at like, I could have tried a bit harder on that, that would really piss me off, right? So I think the fact that Fremantle came along at a time when we were all like, is anyone going to care? And of course it was existential crisis for all of us. I think the most for Chelsea, right? Because we all wanted it to live and be out there. For me, it was, all the hours I put in, this and that, and obviously all of those things. And also just because I cared so much. I think for Chelsea, it's a whole other level, right? You're wondering if you are the boring one. It's a very personal thing in a different way. It's not like, did I make this film badly? It's like, did people think that I'm boring or unrelatable? And it just feels so personal, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And she's wearing her soul. And so I think for that reason, I was just so happy that someone who was, such a respected pillar of the industry in a lot of ways could say, we think this film is worth something. We think it's of value. It may not be the sexy spy thriller documentary, something, whatever that Netflix is going to chew up and spit out, but it is going to be something of value somewhere, and we're going to help you find its place. That was really, it did more than they could ever have imagined at that moment in time.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think the thing is, right, when you mentioned that, when you look at it, you think, oh, that shot could have been better and things like that. You're the only one that knows.
Oh yeah,
right?
but
And that's the thing.
I do.
Yeah, when I talk to people, like, you take, you're working with a comms assistant and things like that, and you're talking about trying to develop them and stuff like that. It's just like, when you're giving a presentation, when you're doing this thing, if you stumble, if you forget something, don't worry, because only you know.
Yeah.
Like the person listening, the person watching does not know. They don't know where you're going. They don't know this story. You're telling this story, right? So you can, you know what I mean? Just you can navigate around those hiccups.
Yeah.
There's no one else sees it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So watching it, I thought this was such a tremendous story. I thought it's so well put together, and really did that humanization of the subject matter and these two people. So yeah, I wasn't like, there was that part, and yeah, the cut was a bit sloppy there. 43 minutes in, to be precise. No. It was great. It was
Thank
great.
you. Thank you so much. Well, then it achieved what we wanted with it, more than we could have imagined. So
Yeah.
appreciate that.
No, also. And before I let you go, because I know you've got other stuff happening and I don't want to keep you too long. But has there been any like talk about trying to get this into schools, like the education system? Because I think it would be a really, I think, valuable thing for, kids to see. So, as we're talking about social media, and it's about the way we communicate, the way we use it. And I think with a lot of these things, if people have that understanding from an early age, then it's nothing. You know what I mean? So I think seeing something like this and being like, oh, right. So, we just do this in that situation. Or, oh, yes, it doesn't really change who they are. They're still this, but you know what I mean? I think it could be that really important kind of, tool.
I love that you bring that up because it's something that we have continual conversations about. Not to bang on about it, but in the footage we didn't put in, in all the stuff we didn't do, there was a lot of very interesting educational material because it nixed the talking heads. There are a lot of really interesting people we sat down with across the world, leading epileptologists, all types of people, but also we had this beautiful collection of testimonials. I reached out to all these amazing people with epilepsy around the world, and we said to them, look, could you send in some testimonials? Because for those sort of intermittent moments that we had that felt more abstract, we thought, do we bring in these other voices and testimonials and these stories? And in the end, it was too much. It was too many voices and too much going on, but we have them, right? We have them and they're amazing.
Right.
And we have been speaking a lot about how can we make use of this stuff in a meaningful way, because we have it and it would be such a shame to sit on it. And of course, I talk about it with my editor every time I see him, which isn't often enough, but we're still really good friends. And we'll be like, oh, we've got to get together and do it. And then, of course, like life gets in the way. And every time we come back, I'm like, oh, we've got to find. But it's such an important point. I think where I would see the challenge in that is people are not, there's still so much stigma around it. Medical cannabis, there's still cannabis is still a drug, and people aren't wrong that high levels of THC on developing brains particularly can be very damaging. That there's very valid evidence to support that, and real world evidence too. So the other thing that happens in the film, and of course we caveated, is we wouldn't want anyone to follow Chelsea's decision. We can't endorse that, because if you're going to try something, you should try it on your own, not because you're influenced by a film, and not because we say it's okay. And we've got to be very safe around that stuff. So I think the difficulty is, can we actually, or maybe the question is like, what is an edit we could do to this so that we could make sure the epilepsy side of things got in front of people without some of the more controversial themes that would definitely not allow this to be in schools. I can just see that happening. But
yeah,
I would love it to be used as an educational resource, whether by the charities themselves. There's a lot of amazing epilepsy charities out there. We did a whole social media campaign with Young Epilepsy. There's Epilepsy Action. There's a lot of good people doing amazing things on the ground day to day. So they might be the right avenues in, but for sure, in terms of how do we use this as a tool in some way, shape, or form, it's something that we're very actively exploring and we really want to be doing.
Yeah, no, maybe if you get someone to talk about, like psychiatrics in young developing minds, right? There's maybe like a brief conversation around that to kind of go, yes, when like it's not good for that, but CBD could be helpful. Take that part away, and then you just have the CBD element, which does this and this and this, and it breaks it down. So it's not like, yeah, everyone should just get like Ching Chong.
I've got an idea. How about you do this in 2 months? You've got 2 months. Get it on the front page of the Guardian. I know it takes weeks.
Oh my days.
Perfect. Thanks for offering. So kind.
We will make it work.
Great. Over to you, Kevin.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a great and insightful conversation, Caroline.
Thank you so much for creating space for us to talk about this together. It's you've obviously had a personal insight on it, and I really appreciate you bringing that to the table. And it's just really fun to talk about at this point. As I said, I'm not in the trauma zone of it now. I'm past the trauma zone. I'm into the celebration zone, and I'm proud of it.
I'm really glad you had a great experience at Rain Dance, and you were even just actually able to, watch it in a room with people. Because during the pandemic, talking to people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, we had it at this festival and it was remote." And I'm just like, I mean, it's great. You had the premiere at this festival, but you weren't able to be in the room and get that, that vibe, that ambience, that, excitement. So, the fact that you were able to have that, that's incredible.
Thank you. And, I think my producer would kill me if I didn't say that I don't think I'm allowed to say what festival it is, but we will be in another London-based festival in the new year. So if people are listening to this and interested in coming to see it or want to connect with us, we have Sisters Interrupted Movie, which is our Instagram, and we'll be having another showing on a big screen, which is so much better than on your laptop or your phone or whatever. So we'd love it if you came along, and we're super grateful for everyone taking interest in a little film.
Awesome. So all the screening information will be on the Instagram?
Correct. On the Instagram. Not on mine, because I'm
Wicked.
a crappy Instagram user, but Sisters Interrupted Movie is under Chelsea's control, and she's amazing with it. So
Okay. Oh, one quick thing that I
yeah.
noticed today,
Oh
just doing a little bit last minute, you know what I mean? Oh,
yeah.
what's
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
Research. I noticed that young old Chelsea had a little bun in the oven that's popped.
She did. It was so amazing. I think that felt Silver. He's my godson, actually. Yeah.
Ah.
I cried when she told me. Literally, she was fine, and I was like sobbing in the back of the car. It felt like a really full circle moment. She documented her journey with it, but it wasn't an easy one. And so he's just this little miracle that feels like the sort of like, the Lion King moment at the end of the whole process. Like, we've got Silver.
Yeah.
So,
No, because it was, watching the documentary and seeing that part about in the kitchen, and
yeah,
then seeing that I was just like, oh man,
yeah,
that's really nice.
yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, exactly. No, it was a beautiful moment. It was beautiful. I'm so happy for her. He's adorable.
Oh, lovely. All
Yeah.
right. Well,
Well, thank you so much. What a joy to talk to you.
oh, no, thank you. No, this has been great. I appreciate you, you know what I mean, just giving me the time for this conversation, because I think it's always fascinating when you watch something that's so interesting to be able to talk to the people behind it, right? To find out, okay, what was that process like? How did it come about? Like what was your vision? Just all of those things. So it's just been such a joy to talk to you about this,
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Hope we speak soon.
Yeah. On your next project, make sure you stop by.
Will do for sure.
All right. You take care.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.